Hey everyone, it's Alex, and welcome to Altered Insights. As always, I'm joined by Trickster. Kawa happens to be casting a major event for Altered in Europe. Do you want to fill us in on what's going on, Trickster? Because Kawa's been streaming for like 8 hours already.
Yeah, this is the biggest altered event yet, and the biggest one on the calendars for quite a while. We have 1,024 player cap for this event going on right now. It's happening in France. It's the Ludo Trotter Altered Open, and I think it's in. I'll get this name maybe wrong. Angers is where it's happening. So this huge altered event. Right now, they're in the middle of top eight, I believe. There was 10 rounds of Swiss for this 1,000 player tournament. They got the best 16 players. Now they're doing, I believe it's just single elimination, best of three to get to the finalists. And yeah, I think the first round of top 16 is done. Kawa's going to be on that top eight grind. It's hours and hours in, as you said, a full day of work. Yeah, it's huge. We're getting a little bit of the information right now as it's playing. I'm hearing some of the decks that have made the top cut, some interesting stuff, and some expected top decks as well. Yeah, that's a lot more stuff we'll have to kind of come back to on our next podcast, though, because since it is like live right now, just only getting so much information as we can as we go.
Yeah, as of right now, like we actually don't have like the conclusive information as to like what the entire the tournament deck lists look like. We have an idea of what's in top 8, top 16 and stuff like that. We don't know who's going to win yet. Kawa is still casting, so that'll be the topic of next week. It'll be great to do kind of like a meta analysis on the first major tournament. A lot of cooking, a lot of brewing. The wide variety of decks is really interesting to see. We're seeing a lot of Waru though, aren't we?
Yeah, depends who you ask, but kind of as expected. Rumor has it half of the top 16 is Waru, and I don't know how many Sigismar, but it sounds like we got a lot of blue in the top cut.
You know what? That does not surprise me. For a while, I was actually huge on Team Blue. I was like, you know what? I'm all in on Ortis. I loved Ortis. And then, like, I started playing BGA, and I'm like, it's just mirror matches, man. I'm just playing against Ortis players. And I'm like, you know what? I got to go against the cut here. I got to go against the grain, as they say. So I started building some new stuff here. I'm working on a Bravos list I'll talk about maybe next week. But I've actually been doing something that I want to talk to you about. And it looks like it's going to make top 8 as well. Faunus. I've been doing some brewing around Faunus and the Mage Dancer and kind of getting a lot of like stuff out there. And I've been trying to find creative ways to anchor them down while also kind of like just spell weaving. And I love the idea that you can use spells to like draw into more cards while also buffing things on the board, right? So I'm actually in love with this hero right now. And I mean, for a while, I'm like, I wasn't a huge fan of Ysmir. I was kind of like hot and cold on it, but now I've been cooking. And now I feel like there might be something to this particular hero combination.
Yeah, it's definitely a fun hero to play. For a while, I swear I thought there was like a bug because when I went into my friends list, every person's icon was the Afanis icon, but actually everyone just likes Afanis a lot, I guess. It's I think like half of the people I'm friends with chose to have this hero as their player icon, and not all of them are playing it right now, maybe because they haven't like found a list they're comfortable on, but yeah, that strategy he has of like getting your cool characters out that benefit from spells and then boosting them all up, it just feels like so rewarding when you pull it off. And it also is like very challenging and just rewarding to get better at this hero, because there really is a lot that you can learn about how to order your turns and like how to like maximize the ratios in your deck to really get it to come all together.
Yeah, and in the next couple of weeks, as I continue to refine the list, I'd love to kind of show it off a little bit, show people what we've been working with, and we'll have a lot of decks to talk about based off of the top 8 tournaments and the top 16, top cut, and we'll have to take a look at what they're doing as well. Now, not to mention, we're talking about tournaments here. You are preparing for what, next week? We got another massive tournament happening, but this one is on this side of the ocean.
Yep, that's right. I'm going to be going to Phoenix, Arizona, meeting up with one of my buddies. We got a shared hotel room, and we're going to be trying to win it all in Gamers Guild's event. They're having an altered tournament as well, the first major tournament for, yeah, like the States. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, it's listen, I'm actually really excited for you because like I'm jealous. I kind of wish I had an opportunity to kind of go down to Phoenix and participate and stuff like that. It's just not in the cards for me this time around.
Mhm.
But I remember the last major tournament I did where I stayed with someone else. Ironically, it was Kawa. We were at the Toronto DLC tournament for Lorcana, and what we made a very bad decision. We decided the night before to like scrim against each other for like hours and hours and hours. And then we're like, yo, it's 2 a.m. and we have to be there for 6. We have 4 hours of sleep. We had to be there for 7, sorry, because of like the way the registration worked. They want us to register at 7 a.m. in the morning to be ready for playing at 8, or I don't even know how it ended up happening, but we had to leave crazy early. And both of us were like zombies as we walked into that place. But I mean, it was so much fun. And it was just, it's one of those things that like, those in-person events, especially when they're like huge, right? I'm actually not sure how many people are at the Arizona one, but like I got to tell you, they're one of my favorite things to do. You get to meet a ton of people, and everyone's so passionate about the game so early on as well. But not just that, it's like there's so much like just like I feel like there's friendships that get built at these events, and I mean, I really wish I was on that plane to Phoenix. So I'm a little jealous, but yeah, like how are you preparing right now?
So, yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I started out really early on. If this is like the longer version of the story, still not too long, but really early on, I started out just trying each hero at least once. And I probably played, yeah, at least like 5 games, even with the heroes that I wasn't as confident about, just to give them a chance. And I feel like I just start with this 18 character roster, and then I just slowly narrow it down, and I just keep playing like all of the ones that are left. When I start getting too disappointed by one, it just kind of leaves the list, and I've just been narrowing down, narrowing down. At this point, I'm basically down to one, but possibly still around like three on the table for what I could be playing. And so now that I've gone from like that really wide spot and now I'm kind of more narrow, around when I had like 6 heroes left, then I started trying to get the unique cards I needed. This is kind of like a new step that wouldn't be involved in maybe other games, but now it's like, well, you only have like half of your deck at this point if you're just playing on like Exalted, because you still need to find some of those last cards that'll be unique to you. So once I had like a general idea which heroes I was looking for, I just kind of went on that hunt for unique cards. And at that point too, depending on which ones I was able to find, it did influence who I was going to pick in the end. Because if I like had 3 great cards for a hero, it definitely makes them more enticing than one of the heroes where I only found like one card that I really like for them. So that was about like maybe like a month to 2 weeks ago. That was where I was at, is trying to dig for the unique cards. So now the last 2 weeks roughly, I've mostly just been playing the finalized list for like my top 3 or so heroes on Board Game Arena. And I'm just trying to like grind games for a couple reasons. One, Altered is new enough that I still feel like it's easy to make dumb mistakes, and there's a lot of things that you can just learn by making that mistake once. And so, yeah, I'm trying to just get in enough games that I don't get to an event and be like, oh, this is how this card works or something. Like, there's an interaction here that I just hadn't seen before and wasn't prepared for. So I'm trying to get all that out of the way. And I'm also just trying to see which of the decks are the most consistent for me, and just kind of see from that sample size with like jamming a couple different heroes which one I feel like I have the best results with, and which one I feel like I have the most control over being able to like find ways to lines to win. And so yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm really just in the my deck is basically done. Only a couple cards are going to change, and I'm just getting those games in and just making sure that my gameplay will be super tight by the time the event rolls around.
And when you say digging for cards, it's kind of interesting to hear you say this. Are you referring to literally buying boxes and trying to find things? Because we don't have the marketplace yet, right? Because if we had the marketplace, you could very well say, okay, I need this type of unique. I know I'm going to pay $30 or $40 for it or whatever it happens to be, but I'm going to find the perfect unique for my competitive deck, and I don't care how much it costs. And there's that approach. But we don't have that. So I'm kind of wondering what your I'm digging for uniques actually looks like.
It's an extensive process. I did open around 9 displays, some shared with friends at the beginning to try and find cards. I don't know if I have a single card that I'm considering using at this point that came from opening those displays, which is it is unfortunate. It's not that I didn't get any good cards, but they just happen to maybe be for like a different hero than the one I'm trying to bring, or maybe I think they'll be really good in a future set with the right card pool, but there's just not at the moment. most of the way I've been finding my cards, if you're a follower of my channel, my YouTube channel too, you'll see some of this. I I've done a couple things. First, I just go on the Discord marketplaces and the Facebook marketplaces, and I just read cards. And I'll even like read in places that aren't a marketplace. It'll just be like the like pack opening and uniques channel. Somebody posts a picture of a card that I like, and then I'm just sending them a DM or something. And so I've been reading cards and sending messages on these for about 2 months now. And in that time, I've been able to find about 3 uniques I like for most of the heroes. So it's taken months of reading and digging, but I've been able to find basically all the uniques I'd want for around $20 to $40 each. So pretty good prices. Eventually, it just takes a lot of patience to like find that perfect card to come up. Then the next thing now that my channel viewers might see is I have made posts where I'm like, please help me. I'm getting ready for this event. I have a ton of cards to trade. I've got all the promos. I've got all of like my own uniques and a bunch of foilers and different things. I'm like, if you want to trade, send me a message. Here's my contact information. And that has been a great experience too. I've found about like 3 people where I've been able to make some like pretty good trades with, where I've given them a ton of my stuff and they've given me some of the stuff they don't want. And so, yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying everything at this point, reaching out to the followers, reaching out to just, yeah, the Discord communities. And I, I really hope that the marketplace in the future can make this a lot easier, because it has been a very long process, because you can't just go to one place and see all the cards and like all the prices. It's a lot of times the negotiations take like a day or more, because you're having to try and decide between 2 people what the price should be. And if there's a lot of other people that are interested in the card, the price can get over like $100 and just be like unobtainable. I don't really have a budget for that, since I'm trying to complete so many decks right now. And yeah, I don't know. It's been a long process. I think I've been able to find some gems, but yeah, I hope it isn't this extensive and I can spend more time playing the game, less time finding the cards in the future when we do have the digital marketplace.
Yeah, I think the digital marketplace will be huge, and its implementation I think is going to be important as well for storefronts too, because like the digital marketplace makes so that like you're not just going to a store and buying singles, right? So those storefronts have to have the ability to kind of interact with the digital marketplace. I think there are manners. I mean, neither of us are storefronts, so perhaps we'll have to see when the implementation is actually launched to see how they can interact. But you're right; it would take a lot of the nuance out of those transactions, because you have it's like hey, it's eBay and here's all the cards for Muna and here's all the uniques for Muna Caregiver, or however they're going to sort it out, which I think is obviously going to be very beneficial. Now, I don't want to press you too much on the tournament preparation, because I think this is the point of time where you say, you know what, Alex, I'm working on this Sierra and Oddball deck that I'm definitely bringing 100%. I'm going to take it all the way to the ship. That's what you should be saying. But what archetypes and what heroes are you kind of preparing to see very often?
Yeah, that's a great question. And kind of as like a direct answer, I did make a video recently that I'll give some highlights from on my channel, where I had my predictions for the 6 heroes I thought would be like the most represented and perform the best at Angers and Phoenix. And I still am pretty confident that like the picks that I have there are correct. And I'm pretty honest in that video. The heroes that I have in the top 6 there are the top 6 heroes that I was considering playing as well. So I'm not going to be like, here's the 6 heroes you should bring, but I'm going to play at Saudi or something like that. Like, these are the 6 heroes that I have the most faith in for myself and other players. And so, yeah, just like a quick run through of those. Sadly, Bravos didn't get a hero in the top 6 for me, at least. I think Kojo got an honorable mention, but the heroes I'm looking at, starting in, I think, the faction order. So first with Axiom, I really think Traced is a very strong pick. I still do. I think that Traced has a very bad matchup against Waru, and depending on the build of Fen, he can have a very bad matchup there too, because they can give your character sleeting. You'll never get 5 counters. But then Traced has a very good matchup for some of the heroes like Tasia and arguably even Sigismar. And so, yeah, that's a very polarizing hero where you have really bad and really good matchups. But since the good matchups are so good, I think that hero could really do well. Going to the next faction, so skipping over Bravos, I didn't pick anyone from that. But for Lyra, I think Fen is a very strong pick. And I think that it's especially likely to top just because I feel like a lot of players will be bringing it. It's very popular online, and so if the tournament like breakdown is any similar to online, there should be a lot of players who do bring Fen. It's kind of a deck where I'm a little less comfortable playing it because you don't have as much control over the cards you draw. You do, though, get the benefit. You might have a little less gameplay fatigue because you don't have to think about that mana decision. But it's a deck where I think that somebody can top and win with it every time, but I just don't know if it would be me if I brought it because I'd be afraid like of the low rolls. But it's a very strong deck. Next, that'll take us to Muna. So for Muna, I do feel like Tasia can be very strong still. I'll talk about it, yeah, more in that video, but I think that some of the best uniques I've ever seen are for the Muna faction. So if somebody could get those together, maybe it's me, maybe it's somebody else, that deck could definitely be worth considering. I think that you have a very good early game, and it's actually pretty easy to 2-0 somebody early on. And so, yeah, I think this is a very strong deck. It has a couple of bad matchups. Probably your worst matchups are going to be something like Afanis and, sorry, some of your worst matchups are going to be Afanis and Traced, but you do have pretty good matchups into both of the Ortis decks and some of the other heroes that are very strong. And so if you don't want to play maybe some of those popular picks, this is a great one to be able to still run your deck into them. After that, it'll take us to Ortis. I think Wario and Sigismar are both kind of the top dogs in the meta a little bit, both because that's just what people like to play. The Ortis decks are always the most popular so far from every tournament I've seen. Ortis is the most brought faction, and so I think that it's kind of inevitable if everyone's playing blue that there's going to be some of them in the top cut. I think that for players who have a really good understanding of all of their matchups, Waru can be really good. Some of the biggest problems for Waru, though, is with time limits, he's going to be a very hard hero to play, and with tiebreakers, he's going to be very bad at tiebreakers, and so that's something that you have to kind of weigh when you're making your decision. Especially for the Phoenix tournament, we're playing best of 3 50-minute rounds. For the Angers tournament, they're playing 30-minute best of ones. So I think that Wario could do a lot better in Angers than it would necessarily in Phoenix, but if someone's up for the challenge, they can definitely still bring him and do well with him. Sigismar is kind of just like your other option, right? And he is very good at tiebreakers and very good at getting ahead in the early game. And so I think too, just for like player mindsets, this is going to be a lot easier to pilot, and you can kind of get that early lead in a game and just kind of get in your opponent's head, start making them stress, and maybe not have as many difficult decisions throughout your games and things while still having the same power as other decks. Another very strong hero here. And then lastly, for Izmir, you had him on the screen at the beginning. We were looking at Afanis. I still think that Afanis is a great pick. I think with the right uniques, this hero gets a lot better too, kind of like Tasia. There just are some insane Ysmir uniques. It's just the way that like the effects landed. Some of the heroes just get really powerful uniques that work perfectly with their game plan, and so you have a lot of unique cards that can let you reuse your best spells multiple times. Sometimes like you can reuse your best spells at least twice with one unique card, or maybe even more if you get some combos going with things like Helping Hand and giving Anchor to a character. And so, yeah, I feel like these decks for Faunus could easily make top cut. I believe one of them has at Angers. And I think that, oh, here's an example with Flamel of a way that you can put some of these spells back into your hand. 3 cost here too. This is a beautiful card, yeah, because you would even be able to give this Anchored. Yeah, exactly. These are the types of cards I'm talking about. It will be a very hard deck to pilot, and we are very early on in the life of Altered. So for somebody who is newer to the game or doesn't have as much experience, you might not want to pick this hero, but I think especially as the meta progresses and in the coming months, that Afanis will get more and more popular.
It's funny that you say that, because when I was trying to figure out like what decks I was trying to build for Constructed to be competitive, I actually did a reverse design where I took a look at what uniques I had and then used those to determine which heroes I felt like I could have a disproportionate advantage playing with, right? I have a number of Alphanus cards that I think are absolutely incredible. This is one of them, a 3/3 Flamel 4/2/4 that at dusk you may return a spell from your reserve to your hand. That's great. You can also discard it to return a card from your reserve to your hand. That could also be a spell. But if you think that's the only Flamel that I drew, you would be mistaken, sir. Because if you can believe it, I actually have two Flamels, and I have a second one that's a 5/4, 4/5/3 that from hand you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If it's a spell, draw 3 cards. Which is,
Ooh.
I mean, if you think about it, I'm going to have spells, right? Playing this particular deck. And then from reserve, I may return a spell from my reserve to my hand. So I got this feedback loop, right? And so I was looking at this. I'm like, man, I got these 2 unique Flamels. I also have a Mage Dancer unique. And I'm like, I guess I'm an Alphanus Maid now, right? And so that's kind of how I approached choosing this particular hero as like my first real like competitive brew. If I'm going to go to a constructed tournament, I mean, I'm kind of giving a lot of stuff away if I'm ever going to be competitive, but I'm going to be going towards this route because I have the uniques that I think support my overall game plan. What I find fascinating is it sounds like you kind of did the opposite. You determined which heroes that you were most interested in. You determined where you felt the meta was going to be strongest. And then you tried to outfit those competitive decks with choice uniques that you tried to hunt down. I just think it's a fascinating, different approach.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think that if I got a unique I was really excited about, I might have tried to build a deck around it. And I've seen some people do that very successfully. There's one player, I'm gonna get this name possibly wrong. It's like Idhan or something, and I think it's like IDAHN or something like that. And they pulled some amazing Bravos unique cards, and now that's just like their staple deck. And they have like the Foundry in there, and they have all this crazy stuff going on. They have this Ratatosker that costs 1 from hand, but it's super expensive from reserve, something like 4, but it just does all this crazy stuff. And then with the Foundry out, you can play that for 1 and get all the bonus effects. And I think that's a perfect example of someone who got this crazy unique, realized that there was like this niche use case for it where it can be really good, and then they've just like turned that into something amazing and something that only really they can do until somebody else finds unique similar to them. So yeah, I think that's super viable and an awesome thing that you can do in this game. And yeah, for me though, on the other hand, yeah, I have gone a different route where I kind of started with my decks and then went on the hunt for uniques. And I don't know if that's necessarily the better route, because for some of the heroes, I'd never found the uniques I wanted, and so they just kind of left the table. And so yeah, I don't know what's the best way. The game's so new, but there definitely are 2 approaches to this game, and I'm really excited, hopefully in the future, to try the other route where I pull a card that I'm really excited about and I can try and build a new deck around it.
That's awesome. And before we move on to our main topic of today, which is going to be the newly announced expansion, I want to ask one more thing for those preparing for the tournaments here. Now, obviously, you're preparing for your upcoming event. You're expecting to see lots of Waru. How do you plan on dealing with Robin Hood?
That is the question. Honestly, this is the biggest question of the whole meta for me. I do think that this is a card that, while it maybe isn't oppressive, it's definitely something you have to think about and should shape the way you're approaching tournaments. Little birdie in my ear told me, if you listen to the recent AMA, they are thinking about doing a balance. I think they basically said they will do some type of balance for Robin Hood. I don't know if that's going to be like a restriction on the use of it or if they're going to be changing the effect, but somebody did put that out there already from the company that they think there was a slight design issue here. If you're wondering why, we have the card up now. It says, cards your opponents play cost 1 more. And the common version, it says characters your opponents play cost 1 more. But basically everyone I've seen will be using that rare version. It's a 4-cost 3/2/2, which doesn't seem that crazy on paper. It makes your opponent's cards cost 1 more, but since it's innately like so badly statted itself, you'd think it would kind of even out. They have to play their strong cards at like a worse cost ratio, but you play your weaker card for an expensive cost. You think everything would be fine. The reason that this really starts to get oppressive, though, is the fact that you can use it in combination with the hero Waru and Mac, which lets you put Robin Hood or other characters to sleep for 1 round so that you'll have them around for 2 days. And so this is where things really start to get crazy. You have your opponent's cards costing 1 more now for 2 days in a row. And I think that normally when you just play this from your hand once, you can only really play 1 in a round because you'd need 8 mana to play 2. So you're only really facing 1. And like we were saying, the stats aren't that great, and so it's going to be pretty hard for you to be able to beat your opponent on both sides and have this out. But when you get things going with Waru, now you can have situations, where you get this out for 2. You get 2 out at once to make your opponent's cards all cost 2 more. Basically, they can only play 1 card now each day at that point. And you can also have this same card out for 4 days in a row instead of 2, which is how the game is normally designed to be, because you can play it from the reserve a second time and have it for 2 more days as well. And so it just changes it. So like the whole game against Waru and Mac, your cards are basically going to cost at least 1 more for like almost the entire game. And you basically have to design your deck now for a tournament, knowing that you have to be able to play it normally, and you have to be able to play it in a world where all of your cards cost 1 more, which immediately makes a lot of decks that want to play lots of cards in a turn significantly worse, because Robin Hood has a larger impact on them. There's only a couple ways really right now to play around this card, and the first is using removals, and you just get rid of the threat, and so you just don't have to deal with it afterwards. This is one of the best options to get rid of it in the game. Here on the screen, Cloth Cocoon. It lets you discard a sleep character, so you can play it right after they put the Robin Hood to sleep and get rid of it completely. This one actually lets you put it in the discard pile, which is great. Some of the other answers are only going to send it to reserve, which is a temporary fix. So yeah, that is the first option, is you can just have something like this to get rid of the Robin Hood. I think that basically every deck should be running some amount of removal, because things like Robin Hood or crazy unique cards pretty much require you to have an answer like this, or you'll be in a pretty poor position. And then the second option is just to play a hero where you can put enough stats out that you can still trade expeditions even with a Robin Hood on the board. And I think that strategy is a lot more viable than people have realized. Some of the best ways to do that is using anchored characters. So Aphanis and Tasia can actually be pretty good into Waru, because even though you can't play as many cards each day, you're able to start the round with characters already in play to kind of even that out. And so I think that, that's a really strong way to go into a Waru, is just play something like Tasia. You only play 1 big anchored character per turn, but since you have 2 characters in play, since you'll have the 1 lingering from the previous turn, you can usually keep up on the board. And other heroes can kind of do similar things with like Subhash. You can get that token, and your hero power doesn't cost more, so you can still get a 2/2/2 bug for 1 with Subhash, which can make your war matchup a lot easier. Or some of the other heroes with like permanents and things. If you have a permanent out giving you value, you'll be able to still get that value for free without having to pay any additional cost. And so those are kind of the best ways to play into Waru. But if one of those doesn't fit your deck, it is going to be limiting in a tournament setting, and you will have to either just hope you don't face the Warus, or just know that that's going to be a really tough matchup for you.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough matchup, and like even something like Banishing Gate, when I've been kind of working with Aphanis and stuff like that, it's like, do I really want to commit 5 energy to getting rid of this card?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, then what do I do? Like, then what do you do, right? Because then like you have to respond being punished by the energy cost as it is, and then you're so far behind, right? Because also Waru creates that Ortis Trooper on the sleep effect on the prior day. So like they're actually getting this, like they're double dipping on like the Sigismar style play, while also keeping these highly effective bureaucrats in play, right? So yeah, I can see where like, there's a little bit of frustration there. But that actually is going to take us to our next point of conversation, which is the newly announced expansion pack. You mentioned the idea of balance. Now, before we dive into like what was announced and stuff like that, would you prefer to see something like, okay, instead of say doing an errata on something like a Robin Hood, which I think is probably rough for a first set, you know what I mean? It's like, do you really want to errata a card on your first set where it's like not even that bad? It's not crushing the meta. It's not like completely destroying everything. That's usually what you errata something that is like literally, oh, it's 80% of the meta. It's the only way to actually be competitive. Robin Hood isn't that. It's a real feels bad card that is very effective in a very specific archetype. But would you rather them kind of balance that card, or release cards in this future set that might allow you to counteract Robin Hood, or perhaps bring up the floor of some of the other archetypes and the other heroes that need some love.
Yeah, I do think that that's a great alternative. I love when games can find different ways to shake up the meta, and I think as long as a deck isn't a true tier 0 where it's the only deck you can play, I think it's fine if different heroes have a turn being in the spotlight and being the best heroes. And then in the next expansion, like you're saying, when new strong cards come out, that can let a new hero have a chance to shine. I think that it'd be pretty much impossible and maybe not even that fun if every hero was exactly the same power level. Part of exploring a game is figuring out which ones do have an advantage and trying to find that before other people so that when you go to a tournament you can have better results and things. And so I think it's fine if there are strong heroes, and I think that answering them with new cards would be an amazing way to do it. I think one of the heroes, I would love it if like Axiom got a good answer to Robin Hood. I think that they have one of the harder times dealing with that hero, and so printing a card that is a good answer to him could be like a perfect way to let them be more viable suddenly in the meta and kind of just nullify the strength of Robin Hood. So yeah, I think that's a very good option. The one maybe thing that might lead to an errata for Robin Hood, and the announcers from Equinox have said, is they think that it creates a negative player experience. So I think it's less about the card being too strong and more about having your cards cost one more makes the game less fun for your opponent to play. And so I think they're fine with some cards being stronger than others and some cards having better win rates, but they just aren't excited about this card having like a bad player experience for people where it feels like they can't play the game when they're facing a Robin Hood. It's almost like if you could do your own things, but they were worse, that would be fine. But the fact is, with Robin Hood, you can't even do your own stuff anymore. So I guess that's why they're trying to look at maybe rebalancing this character specifically.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. And that does take us to the Trials by Frost, which is the newly announced expansion coming to Altered TCG, available on January 31st, 2025. And what I really love about this, by the way, here's just a fun fact. The expansion was announced prior to the official release in Canada. I was like, I finally got a chance to do the release this weekend, right? And before we even had our first release, the expansion's out there. I'm like, okay, right? But I'm actually really excited for this. It actually has a very different flavor, very kind of like wintry, which is kind of cool. I'm all for that. It looks like they're going to be theming things as well. You're going to be able to get themed cards, like so the actual Tumult cards are going to be themed, the adventure cards, which I think is pretty nice. You're going to be able to pull those from some of your boosters. But what we're going to talk about here today is we do have three early kind of, not I want to say spoilers, but we have three early cards here. And we're going to maybe talk about kind of like what we're interested in seeing for this particular expansion. What are our hopes, right? So first off the bat, let's talk about, okay, we have a new type of card, or class of card, we should say, and it is going to be the it's a gear. It's a new type of permanent that actually goes into the expeditions. And here's an example. We have the Arcolano Milk, which is a 1/1, and it says, play me an expedition. If it moves forward, I go to reserve during rest. The text of the card reads, when a character joins my expedition, it gains 1 boost and fleeting. So what are your thoughts, Trickster?
Yeah, this is answering a lot of people's question of why do we have these permanent cards and landmarks? Every card that's a permanent is a landmark. Well, it's not true anymore. We have our answers. We're seeing that there will be different types of permanents, and yeah, this is a very interesting card. I wonder if it'll be a theme for the gears where they all work like this, where they'll stick around in an expedition until it moves forward. That could definitely be the case, but with only one to look at right now, it's a little hard to know what to expect. But yeah, I think that's pretty interesting because it's kind of like a permanent landmark that we've seen where it gives you this lingering effect, but this one is super cheap in cost, just 1, and then kind of to counteract that, it only remains on your field until you actually get some value out of it and win a side, and then it goes away. And so, yeah, I think that's pretty clever design. It can give you a way to set up for a future turn and kind of bank some advantage. without being like too oppressive where it will stick around forever. But also, this one goes to reserve, so you can use it again. And most permanents we've seen so far, you play them once and you never get that second use out of them. But this one, yeah, it'll be really easy to just still use it twice, more like a character or a spell almost. I'm pretty excited to see this type of cards. I don't want the game to like evolve too fast and have too many new things in this new expansion. I feel like with even just the same effects and text, you'd be able to create like a whole new expansion at this point, and players would still be happy. But little bits of new stuff like this can definitely get people excited and just give something new to explore. And so yeah, I'm pretty excited about this card. One thing that I immediately notice is it has the potential to do some crazy combos with like some uniques and things we've seen. This one specifically says like every character that joins the expedition is going to get a boost and fleeting. And yeah, it is just on one side because it's expedition, but we've already seen cards that say every time a character gets a boost, do X thing, and some of them are summon a character. So you could easily play one of those characters out that whenever a character gets a boost, it summons a token, and then this will boost those tokens, and you would just kind of go infinite and win one side easily. And so one of the heroes that's almost been good, but just quite outside of like being a top 8 hero is Basira right now. And there are some specifically for that hero really good ways you could use this card, maybe as you were saying, to like shake up the meta and let it have a turn to shine. And so yeah, I think that things like this are perfect examples of what we were looking for, as cards that can kind of rebalance which heroes are good and yeah, give some of those underrepresented heroes. I think specifically we even see Basira in like the Art of the Trial by Frost expansion. And so with 3 expansions per like hero set, and they might be trying to make it so that each one of them gets a chance to be like kind of the front runner and have a chance to shine. And so maybe we'll see other cards for Basira too that could kind of like bring in a way for it to have its turn with this expansion.
Yeah, and I like the idea that like it's a risk and reward thing as well, because each thing's getting fleeting. Now you do have Helping Hand, you do have like tools that you can use to like reduce that effect, but that's kind of an expensive price to pay. The reserve is a very valuable tool, and if everything you're playing is getting fleeting, I mean, if they're coming from reserve, then who cares, right? Because it's when a character joins my expedition. It doesn't say it has to be from hand, it could be from reserve, it doesn't matter. But at the same time, you don't want to be blowing up your hand completely. It's also very inexpensive, so it's very notable that you could play something out like this as a leading card, and then start playing into it as well with less expensive cards, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunities to be creative with this, and the fact that it'll remain in play even if you do not progress your expedition, I think is an interesting effect as well. I do want to comment on one thing you mentioned at the start of the discussion, was that the idea of like bloating the effects so early. I think I agree that I'd like it if they only produced like maybe one like kind of new effect, if that, on each expansion, because the game is still so new. We're still figuring it out. As I said, literally this was announced prior to the release in Canada, so it's like, you know, people in Canada are just getting it for the first time. And so, like, we don't want to overwhelm people and overcomplicate things. And so I think that it is good that the main set has some breathing room so that people can learn, experiment, and kind of like have their fill before we start really changing the formula a little too much. Now, this is the first gear that we've been offered here as an Expedition Permanent. And that takes us to our second spoiler, Dementor, which is a 6/6 for Muna. It has 6/5/5 stats, and it reads, if I'm in plant, I'm eternal, meaning that it does not go to reserve after rest. Trickster, what are your thoughts?
This is an interesting card. So far, all of the cards I've seen that get a benefit from being in forest have forest as their weakest stat, but for the first time we're seeing the highest stats are in forest, so natural synergy there with itself. Yeah, a 6 cost 6/5/5 that sticks around, that's not losing that much in stats. Comparatively, we have Shenlong, which is an 8/8/8, but since you get this twice in a row, usually at least, you're going to be getting a much better return. I think that this could be very good, and I feel like I'm trying to think about like the way the expeditions are laid out. Almost always, you're only going to be able to have this stick around once. So I feel like that most of the time, this basically just has anchored, but compared to Cone Man, which is a 5 cost 3/3/3 anchored, this is a 6 cost 6/5/5 anchor, so you're getting an additional 3/2/2 in stats, but twice in a row. I think that's a pretty good return for 1 extra mana. And it brings in the opportunity to try and play skillfully and get even more value out of this. If you have this starting in one of your like very beginning expeditions, if you have this on like the hero or companion side that hasn't moved, there is a chance that you could be in forest as you always start in and move into forest. Or if you can perfectly line it up so that when you're leaving one of the tumult cards, you go into the next one that happens to have forest, you could get to have this stick around for like 3 days as well. And so that will bring in some things for like players to consider. You can't just drop this on either side and have it always do everything you want it to do. It is a card that you have to save for the right moment, which I like. And I think that we saw similar things with the previous card we were looking at, the milk, because there it's like you were saying, it gives things fleeting. And so now you can, for both of these cards, you can kind of, your opponent and you can make decisions to try and take advantage of their like strengths and weaknesses. For the milk card, your opponent could try and make you lose on the side that it's on, so that next round you're giving all your cards fleeting there too, and they could kind of like burn out your resources. And for this card, you could try and block your opponent so that they don't go into forest, or you could try and like specifically lose so that you have this around the next day. And so there's going to be a lot for players to mess around with to try and learn how to use this at the highest level. Looking at this effect quick, it says, if I'm in forest, I am eternal. So I'm thinking a lot of times you're going to play this not in forest and have to win so that you move into forest, so that at night when you check, you're in the location that makes it eternal, which really is going to give like kind of a huge competition at that point, where your opponent's going to really want to beat you on that side now, because they know if you win, the card's sticking around for another day, but if they can beat you, you won't even be in forest. And so I think that's going to create some interesting situations. It's not like when you play this, if I'm in forest, I get anchored. No, you have to be in forest at rest. And so that often will mean if you're trying to win on this side, you have to actually be able to win for this to even gain that effect that night. And so, yeah, I really can think of a lot of situations that even if this isn't competitive, it would just be like very interesting and create for like a kind of fun and play experience.
And that's a great point, because it does have like relatively decent stats. Like it's a little off of the mark in terms of statistics, but it's kind of like what you mentioned. The fact that it essentially has a situational anchor during rest also means that it's limiting its applicability in something like Rin and Orchid. Like Rin and Orchid could run this, right? Like there's nothing stopping you from running this, but like the manner in which you run this needs some consideration, right? You don't just slam this in the deck and just slam it down, right? But if you are in mountains or water, 5 stats might be enough to win anyway.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's interesting to think about. In the situations like I was saying, where you're trying to move into forest so this has eternal, you're going to be using those weaker stats like you're saying. And so, yeah, that's probably some interesting like design decisions as well, that maybe the game designers were thinking that that's how they can balance it, is you would be in those like weaker stat regions. And so, yeah, this will be a lot of fun to play. And I'm very curious to see what the unique, the rare version would look like. Will it have tough, which is often important on expensive characters like this, so that you can't just use a removal on it? Or will it cost less, or will the stats be higher? I mean, any of those could be really strong. Or maybe will it even have some crazy effect that says like you treat all regions as forest, like something like that? Absolutely insane.
Yeah, so like a Kraken style effect. And that's going to bring us to our third card that was revealed or spoiler, depending on how you want to look at it. We do have the Moth Larva, which is a 1/1 of Ysmir, stats 1/0/1, and it reads, from hand, if there are 2 or more exhausted cards in reserve, I gain 1 boost. What are your initial thoughts?
So my initial thoughts, it's kind of scattered, because the first thing is we don't even know like what this is talking about at this point. It says if you have 2 exhausted cards in the reserve. At this point, there isn't a way to exhaust cards in the reserve. It is something that you can do, like when your mana is exhausted and spent, that is essentially the same. It means like turning it to the side, and heroes that use abilities that exhaust them get turned to the side as well. So I'm guessing either cards are going to gain a new like text box or something, which lets you exhaust them in the reserve for an effect, or maybe it'll be a negative thing where cards get exhausted in the reserve and then possibly you won't be able to play them or something. But like, we don't even know what this is talking about. So we know there's going to be something new coming in this expansion. It's kind of like when Sacrifice was spoiled with Lindua, and we didn't have a single card yet that sacrificed. So we're like, well, we know something's coming. I think the Stargazer was the first card, and it's like, if I'm sacrificed, X. But we didn't have any cards that sacrificed yet. So it's like, we know something's coming for this, but it's hard to say how good it's going to be, because I don't know if that's going to be a common effect. I don't know if that's going to be a benefit, or if it's going to be a drawback. But let's say that everything works, and that this is always active. Let's just pretend you always have 2 cards in your reserve that are exhausted. At that point, you're getting a 2/1/2, which is the exact same rate as the rare Ortis Trooper. And so I think that for a common, that seems pretty good. You get rare stats for a 1-drop on a common. It has extra conditions, and I think that's always something in Altered. It's like, the more requirements you can put on a card, then like the better return you're going to get. And so if you can make a deck where those requirements aren't even hard to achieve because you're naturally doing that, stuff like this could be really good. It is from hand only, and so if you play it out from the reserve, it's just going to be a 1/0/1. My initial impression is this card seems fine, and it is a common, but it doesn't seem like too overpowered to me, because you kind of have to work hard to get the stats of like a thing that you can already get, and it only works from hand and not the reserve. But I don't know. It's a fun, interesting card, and honestly, if anything, this is just like a super teaser that like something's coming, and what's it gonna be?
I think that's exactly it. I think that was their intention when they chose this as being one of the 3. They like, hey, let's show the moth larva, because it's going to basically hint at potentially some sort of new things to kind of be coming in this particular expansion. And the way I read it is, I'm kind of like you. I read it as being a more positive effect. I kind of see it as like a landmark that can be exhausted, except it's in reserve, obviously, right? Because landmarks can also be exhausted in their position. And I imagine we're going to get some new cards that can do the same. To close off the conversation, I'll ask you, Trickster, what is like your what is your primary hope for this particular expansion?
That's a good question. I don't know if I've locked this down yet, but I'm trying to think. I feel like, if anything, I would just hope that each hero at least gets one new tool that can mix up the way they're played. And maybe those won't be competitive, and some of them you'll stick to kind of like the current playstyles, but it would be fun if every person who plays Altered, if they have a favorite hero, they have at least one new thing to try in this expansion. And so I'd hope that, yeah, there's something that feels a little new, or like gives you a different way to play each of the heroes. And I'd hope that too, that some of the heroes that are weaker get enough support that they can move into like those top slots, and so that the meta doesn't feel stale.
And for our mailbag segment, we do have a comment from Solid Scorpion. And Trickster, I'd be interested in your thoughts. Solid Scorpion did say, the reason I love this TCG is because it is a very balanced feeling. The deck building rules really lean into putting powerful cards in your deck, but with the limits. It really does set everyone on equal footing. Really looking forward to playing this more and more. So Trickster, what do you think of the balance approach to Altered TCG?
I've been pleasantly surprised by the balance, not even just in gameplay, but it feels like they've got great art, they've got lore, they've got like everything for every type of player. And even looking at the decks, this is going to be like the stupidest realization, but I just realized the other day, I was like, oh, since you have 3 unique slots, if you want, you can run all 3 of the same name, which like probably a lot of people have realized, but I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. That's just enough to be able to have a full play set of one of the names that you want. And then like 15 divides perfectly by 3 as well. And then with the 39 card stacks, you divide it by 3 as well. You don't have to run like a random one of at the end. And so, yeah, everything just is really balanced, and it's nice. I think that the one thing maybe people in the comments might start to be like, well, let me get my knives out or whatever, is like, maybe they won't say that each of the heroes is equally strong and each of their card pools is equally strong right now. But I do feel like, yeah, in general, that it has been a lot of fun to try like all 6 factions, and it feels like they all have been given attention by the designers to have interesting and varied ways to play them. And so, yeah, I think that I would agree that Altered does feel very well balanced, and in the competitive scene, some of the stuff is going to be stronger than others. But I think that's something that will rotate with future expansions and possibly restrictions or erratas and things. And so I'm not too worried about that overall. But I feel like, yeah, the core is set up to be very balanced and to continue to work for a long time into the future.
I absolutely agree. And I mean, listen, the game's still early on, and what feels overpowered today might ultimately not be overpowered tomorrow, which is something that happens with card games all the time. Maybe Waru's on top now, but we're only in our first tournament. We'll see if Phoenix shifts things up. We'll talk about that. And then next thing you know it, a couple months from now, Waru's not even in the meta because someone just figured out a way to make Sierra and Oddball crush the meta. We're coping a little bit here, but hey, it just might happen. Thank you guys so much for watching this week. We sincerely appreciate it. Down in the description below, I'm going to link the video that Trickster was referencing prior with his meta calls with regards to what he was expecting to see in the upcoming tournaments. Thank you for all your support, and we'll see you on that next one.